we look at this brief that the CNN and Acosta lawyers filed, and on the first page you notice several things. The nastiness of it. They not only sue the president in his official capacity, they sue the chief of staff. They sue William Shine, who's Bill Shine, the deputy chief of staff to the president, and they sue him because he used to be a senior executive at Fox, so they're trying to make an issue out of this. See, it's all political. They sue Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary. They sue the United States Secret Service, Randolph Ailes in his capacity of director, and John Doe, the Secret Service agent who pulled Acosta's hard pass. Now, none of that's necessary, but they're doing that as a tactic, a nasty litigation tactic. And let me tell you, too, Ted, something. You're not scaring anybody. This is a pathetically stupid lawsuit. It is a stain on your careers. It is a stain on your legacy. And it's also a dangerous lawsuit. Let's say they win. Let's just speculate for a minute. Let's say they win. That ultimately the Supreme Court, whatever number of justices, decides that they will determine what a presidential press conference shall look like, how it shall be managed. Not the president of a co-equal branch of government, but you're now going to have judges determining what takes place in the White House, in the press room. That means that separation of powers goes out the window. That means that every reporter who thinks they have a gripe against a president can now go into federal court. That means every one of these massive media corporations can now go into federal court. That means news outlets, so-called, that do not have any representation at the presidential press conference, that they can go to court. And it means you will not have a civil press conference. I don't mean there shouldn't be tough questions, even aggressive questions. I mean there's a difference between that and anarchy. And in the end, the President of the United States won't have any press conferences because he's not compelled to. And for Ted Olson and Ted Boutros to bring this trash is really outrageous. They threaten the entire notion and tradition of a press conference. They reject separation of powers. This isn't about freedom of speech, ladies and gentlemen. This is about settling a score. CNN and Mr. Acosta trying to settle a score. It's about Time Warner Corporation. It's about CNN Inc. And it's about lawyers who get paid $2,000 to $3,000 an hour wanting to be praised by the very media that they need to keep drumming up business. That's right, I said it. This entire thing is a scam. It has nothing to do with the Constitution, nothing to do with freedom of speech, nothing to do with freedom of press. It's a scam. I'll be right back. Give an example maybe the judges out there can comprehend, particularly the justices. Under our Constitution, you have a right to a vigorous defense if you're accused of a crime. A vigorous defense. At the trial court level, the appellate court level, and if your case gets to the U.S. Supreme Court, at the Supreme Court level. You have a constitutional right to a vigorous defense in order to uphold your due process rights, among other rights. And your lawyer's there, and he or she's arguing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And some of the justices get very aggressive in interfering with the arguments the lawyers are making. And let's say Sotomayor interrupts the lawyer before he can get his first sentence finished. Let's say Breyer interrupts the lawyer 3 minutes in. Let's say the Chief Justice does, and finally the lawyer says, "Stop interrupting me. I have a right to vigorously represent my client. You're violating my constitutional right. Or my client's constitutional right. You may not, you cannot keep interrupting me and not allow me to make my case." And the lawyer will not permit the justices to respond. Keeps arguing with the lawyers. "Justice Breyer, you don't have a right to say that because X, Y, Z, and so and so and so and so." And let's say the court says, "You know what? We're going to hold you in contempt right here, and we're going to remove you." Would anybody argue that the court was wrong, that it violated the Constitution, maybe the Fourth Amendment, maybe the Fifth Amendment, or anything else you can imagine? Would anybody argue that? No. Well, I have a right to a robust, vigorous defense, but you do not have a right to sabotage the court. You can do both. Represent your client vigorously and follow the rules. Mr. Acosta can vigorously question the president and follow the rules. This is not about freedom of the press. And if Mr. Acosta should win a dangerous lawsuit like this, it will undermine freedom of the press, because no president will hold a press conference. And now you'll have the court micromanaging speech. The court micromanaging speech. And Mr. Olson brought this suit. Mr. Boutros brought this suit. And it's disgraceful. And they wrap themselves in the First Amendment like they're civil rights leaders. They're nothing of the sort. They're paid lawyers for a disreputable, phony journalist and a disreputable outlet. You know, going to the mechanic is like going to the doctor. They tell you what's wrong, and you take their word for it, of course. Now, that's what makes those surprise repair bills hit so hard. When a simple oil change...
CNN did ask the White House for some sort of explanation. What did we get?
Well, we first of all got an explanation about there was some physical contact between the reporter, Jim Acosta, and the intern who was dealing with the microphone. They backed away from that because it wasn't justified by anybody who watched the tape.
Well, let's stop there. I saw that. He pulled the microphone back and pushed her arm down. And I don't need glasses to see that. Do you folks? Go ahead.
And the president said, well, we can't have people in this room who don't respect the president or respect...
Your factual recitation is very misleading. That's not how it worked. Folks, you can watch the 2 minutes and 38 seconds yourself. He's acting as if the president was aggressive, not his client. Go ahead.
The First Amendment requires robust, aggressive reporting. Reporters must be free to ask tough questions and to be persistent about it, and they don't bow down or take an oath before they walk into that
Nobody's asking anyone to bow down or take an oath. Did anybody do that? No. There are other reporters in there who are no damn good. April Ryan and then the clown from NBC and so forth. But the president didn't yank their passes. How do you explain that, Ted Olson? How do you explain that? I'll be back.
Mark Levin.
Hello, everybody. Mark Levin here. Our number, 877-381-3811. 877-381-3811. A judge has ordered a hearing, I think for tomorrow or the next day, and a response by the administration to the CNN filing. Really quite appalling, isn't it? Here's Ted Olson also on CNN today. Remember, his office wouldn't even reply to my request, emailed and phone calls, to come on the show to discuss this. They go on CNN, where they're going to obviously get their clients and their client surrogates, so-called reporters, asking setup questions. Like this one from Brooke Baldwin. Cut 5, go.
Back in 1977, there was already precedent on this in a decision from 1977 from the U.S. Court of Appeals. What was ruled then?
Well, the court ruled then that if someone was going to attempt to interfere with or take away the press credentials of someone covering the White House, there had to be an explanation, there had to be objective procedures, there had to be a fair process and an opportunity to be heard. None of that applies here.
And let me stop. None of it should apply here. The court shouldn't be able to tell the White House, these are the procedures that you must follow before you allow a reporter in or a reporter out. Now, I want you to understand, I defend our Constitution, but I understand what's meant by freedom of the press. And when you have somebody among the press who takes it upon themselves to hijack a press conference. I don't care what questions they're asking. It is absolutely unacceptable. And here's the deal. We have some traditions and customs throughout our country in all walks of life. You have them at home. You have them in your place of business. You have them when you drive. Think about driving. Red light, yellow light, green light. You got to follow it. 2 solid yellow lights. Broken white lines. Broken white lines. All kinds of signals and everything. Imagine if people just decided, look, I have a right to drive. I'm not going to follow them. Or a classroom. There has to be some level of civility and decorum. Or a courtroom. Nobody's saying people can't be different. Some more aggressive than others. Some more outgoing than others. Nobody, obviously. But when you're repeatedly and consistently disrupting a press conference and drawing attention to yourself, and then you leave the room and you're interviewed by your colleagues at CNN and you continually call the president a liar and suggest he's a racist and so forth and so on, how is a president supposed to conduct such a press conference? Obama never had to put up with any of this. With any of it. Go ahead.
And the reason that is so important is that if that process doesn't exist, a president or anybody working for a president or other public official can discriminate against any reporter on the basis of that reporter's viewpoint or simply because the president doesn't like that reporter.
Well, let's stop right there. It hasn't been done, except in this case, during this presidency. Why is he arguing hypotheticals? I don't know that it's been done. If it has, very rarely in past presidencies. So they throw out these scare tactics. If the president gets away with this, then he can do it to anyone. But he doesn't do it to anyone because he get bad press. Past presidents, recent modern presidents, they haven't done it just to anyone. Have they? So that is a phony argument. To argue in the alternative like that, and I hope this Judge Kelly, or whatever his name is, doesn't fall for this nonsense. Deal with what took place in the room. Not the speculative arguments that Olson's very good at, that Boutro's very good at, that all these guys are very good at. We're not arguing about a pattern here. We're not arguing about a pattern of press personnel having their hard passes pulled. We're arguing about one pass, one time, one guy, one circumstance that caused it all. And the pattern that led up to it. Go ahead.
There's plenty of evidence that President Trump does not like that reporter or the organization, CNN, for whom he works.
Really? And you see, if Ted Olson were here, he'd be questioned. So there are several other reporters for CNN that have hard passes. How come he didn't pull all of them? How come he didn't ban CNN altogether? And not just from the White House, but from Air Force One, from all his public events. He didn't do any of that. Did he? And there are other press organizations he can't stand too, like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, and you can give the whole list. So CNN is not singled out for any disparate treatment. It's singled out because when the president exercises his First Amendment free speech rights, he notices how CNN conducts itself. Everybody notices it. Go ahead.
Cannot allow public officials to discriminate on the basis of their personal prejudice or feelings towards a reporter.
He didn't. There were 5 different reporters in that room where the president, at least theoretically, could have pulled their hard passes. He only did it on one case. So the facts belie the argument. Go ahead.
Freedom must be free. The First Amendment must stand for something, and it must stand for the fact that we have situation all over the world where
So now we're going to argue about what goes on in police states. This is what they do, these lawyers. Now we're going to argue what goes on in police states. Go ahead.
Being beaten, jailed, intimidated, and in fact murdered. We can't allow that step to be crossed here.
Oh, come on. Are you kidding me? Now you know why he won't come on my show. She sat there with that dumb look on her face, and she never followed up, and she can't, because CNN is the plaintiff. And by the way, have you ever heard of a news organization that has its lawyers on there talking about the news, whether it's Boutros or whether it's Olson? And here I am, a lover of free speech and freedom of the press. Couldn't get Olson on my show. Couldn't get him on my show. They wouldn't even respond to us. Because, Ted, you know, you wouldn't get away with these arguments here. I'd be polite and civil, unlike Jim Acosta. Now, isn't that interesting? That they won't come on my show. Why, do they feel like I'll be treating them like Jim Acosta treats the president? We want robust debate here, too. It's Mr. Acosta's conduct. It's the fact that Mr. Acosta really doesn't ask questions. It's the fact that he hijacks press conferences. Now, these are the same people who tell us that Alex Jones is a nut. No, I don't know who's a nut, and I don't know who isn't a nut. But is Jim Acosta, and I'm not talking about philosophically, when he gets in the president's face and something like that, is that behavior much different? Is Jim Acosta banned from social media? No. No. The media are becoming a joke. The media are beclowning themselves. This lawsuit is a joke. That doesn't mean it won't get somewhere, because a lot of these joke lawsuits, unfortunately, seem to get somewhere. Cases I think that shouldn't even be anywhere close. We see some of these decisions. Now, Olson's colleague is Ted Boutros. I know him as well. Counsel for CNN and Mr. Acosta. Cut 2, go.
CNN's argument is very straightforward, that the First Amendment is meant for the press to be able to act on behalf of the American people and the public.
No. The press doesn't act on... You don't even know what the First Amendment means. And freedom of the press. Freedom of the press. The media does not act on behalf of the American people. The media facilitate discussions between officials and citizens, among officials. They don't represent the American people. They certainly don't represent all the American people, and that really isn't the media's purpose, is to represent the American people. We don't get the vote on any of this. So that's a misstatement of the facts. Go ahead.
And here, when the White House revoked Mr. Acosta's press pass, it's clear it was based on the content of his reporting, the fact that he was asking...
See, this is what they want the court to do. The content of the reporting, not his conduct. The content of the reporting, not his conduct. First of all, he's not reporting. There's no reporting going on. He's arguing over a term with the President of the United States. The President answered it, but he didn't accept the answer. The President answered it again, but he didn't accept the answer. Then he went on to question number 2, then question number 3, then question number 4. It's his conduct. Mr. Boutros, you wouldn't dare conduct yourself this way in federal court, would you? And when you go into federal court in the next day or two, you're not going to conduct yourself like the Jim Acosta of the legal profession, are you? Why is that? Because he'll get thrown out on his ass. And these judges and justices wouldn't tolerate for 1 second the kind of conduct that took place at that press conference. Not for a second. Well, we're not elected. We're lifetime appointments. We're adjudicated. That's not the point. The president is holding a press conference. He's not hiding from the press. There are 150 members of the press there, including many who've been on TV who have called him Hitler, racist, liar, misogynist, every word in the book. They're sitting there. April Ryan, that guy Peter What's-His-Face, a whole bunch of them. Even other reporters from CNN. Others. The First Amendment does not give a property right to a seat and a hard pass to Mr. Acosta. The nation is not threatened in any respect. The Constitution, the First Amendment, freedom of the press, by Mr. Acosta's absence. As a matter of fact, it's improved. because more reporters can ask more questions of the president when Mr. Acosta is not there. Go ahead.
Tough questions and has been doing that.
All right, forget it. This guy. These are hired mouthpieces. That's what they are. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
Of our media. And so they want federal courts, most of which are progressive now too, to rule on this. See, I'm a constitutionalist. Apparently Ted Olson is not. He's used the Constitution to advance his social agenda in California. Now he's using the Constitution to advance not freedom of the press and the First Amendment, but to advance CNN's business agenda. Dressed up as a great battle, like the Zengerle battle. It's none of that. This is a scam. The media will write the books on it, but it's a scam. Jim Acosta's not threatened. Jim Acosta wasn't put upon because of his views. We're not even supposed to know Jim Acosta's views, are we, Ted and Ted? But they didn't really come to the defense of somebody who really needed protection. They came to the defense of a company that's going to pay them $2,000, $3,000 an hour. I don't think they're taking this pro bono, are they? And a whole new business practice over there, Gibson Dunn, a media practice. These people aren't doing this because they're altruistic and noble, although you could be altruistic and noble in a case like this or in other cases. But this is not a grand First Amendment case. The judges will hope it is because they want to go down in history, and Acosta will because he wants to go down in history, and CNN up against the system and the man, and the great lawyers who are there to make the case. This is pathetic. This is really manufactured news. This is a manufactured event, almost as if it was intended from the first moment. From a barely surviving cable network. CNN is well, let me put it to you this way. Why is it that we know who Jim Acosta is, even though he has almost no viewers? There's a lot of reporters in that room. It's because Acosta uses it to draw attention to himself. That's why he's invited on these late night shows. Really, these reporters shouldn't be famous. They should just be doing their jobs. But they're not, and they won't. It's an absolute disgrace. Let's go to cut. Which cut do I want to go to? Let's see here. Let's go to cut 3, Mr. Producer. This is Boutros, one of the lawyers. Go.
The Robert Sherrill case talked about both the First Amendment and due process, and the D.C. Circuit said in a case involving the denial of a White House press pass that before the White House rejects credentials, it needs to give due process because of the important First Amendment issues at stake. So the court said there has to be notice, a written decision explaining why the credentials have been denied or revoked.
And by the way, the court was a circuit court. It was not the Supreme Court. And there are multiple circuits in this country. And it's not the final word. And they're acting as if it is. Because some panel on the circuit court in D.C. in the 1970s ruled this. It needs to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court needs to be very, very damn careful about interfering in this. Because if I'm President of the United States and this due process stuff is upheld, which really is not intended to apply to this at all, then I'm never going to hold another presidential press conference. I'm just not. I'll hold press events with local media, regional media, state media. That's how Obama got around it. I just won't hold a presidential press conference. There's nothing in the Constitution that compels it. Or if I do, Acosta will be back and I'll never call on him. If he interrupts again, well, then I won't have a presidential press conference. When will the Supreme Court have a press conference, by the way? This is how irresponsible this lawsuit is and CNN is. I mean, in the aggregate, conservative talk radio is much larger. Let me put it to you this way. This radio show is much larger than any combination of shows on CNN. Combination of 2 or 3 shows. Well, do I have a right to be in the press room as opposed to CNN? No, they're reporters. Okay, I'll say I'm a reporter. How many different than Acosta? I just have a different viewpoint than he does. So the court goes down this path. You hear these guys say, we have a circuit court decision in Washington, D.C., the D.C. Circuit. All kinds of due process, and you have to give notice, and you have to explain the reason, and you have to do this, and you have to... Really? Where did that come from? Nowhere. It was made up. Which brings me back to my problem with the courts overall. That was made up. There's no threat to the media by this president. He's not locking up anybody. He's not shutting down newspapers. He's not doing what some past presidents have done. He's not unleashing the FBI on the AP and the Washington Post and the New York Times and all the rest of it. He had the gall to remove Mr. Acosta because after almost 2 years of Mr. Acosta disrupting press conferences, coming between we the people and the president, coming between other press and we the people, coming between other press and the president. Enough was enough. This is not a man fighting for freedom of the press. This is a guy who's a showboat, a narcissist, an egomaniac. His behavior wouldn't be tolerated in a classroom. It wouldn't be tolerated in a church. It wouldn't be tolerated in a synagogue. It wouldn't be tolerated in any court in this country. This isn't a First Amendment case. This is the case of an a-hole out of control. What great, tough questions did he ask? You know, Mr. President, you call it an invasion. But it's a caravan. No, I call it an invasion. You can call it what you want. I call it an invasion. But you know you're wrong, Mr. President. It's not an invasion. There are hundreds of miles. What kinds of questions are these? He's the Morton Downey Jr. of the media. I'm probably not doing Morton Downey Jr. any favors, so I shouldn't say that, I guess. Now, hear how the media treat other politicians, freedom of the press and all. Here's this guy, Mike Allen. He's had more media jobs than anybody I can imagine. He's a news guy. I want you to listen to this. He's interviewing Nita Lowey. Nita Lowey is an old lady. She's 82, and she's a radical nutjob from New York. And now she's got all kinds of power as a chairman of some committee. She's in the majority. Now listen to how this guy interviews her. Cut 7, go.
What's the funnest thing about being in the majority?
Oh, my God. The funnest thing is to win. And we have our boxing gloves on, and we're going to fight for our priorities.
You're ready to rumble.
I'm ready. And so is Nancy.
Have you been to the White House?
No.
So the president, he hasn't invited you?
No.
Why?
Because he doesn't always have good judgment.
Should the majority look into these issues related to President Trump that has come up? The Space Force.
Yes.
James Comey's firing.
Yes.
The travel ban.
Yes.
The family separation policy.
Absolutely.
Hurricane relief in Puerto Rico.
Oh, it was absolutely inadequate.
White House staff use of personal email.
Oh, for sure.
The president's business dealings abroad.
Absolutely. And I want to see his tax return.
That is quite a list. Because you control the money, you can essentially investigate anything.
Correct.
How do you like that, reporter? Oh, man, freedom of the press in this administration. Isn't it great? How do you like that, reporter? It's disgusting, isn't it? The truth is, and you can't really argue it in a court because you're filled with progressives in the court too, that these reporters are progressives. So many of these judges are progressives. And The progressive movement, which is a little over 100 years old effectively in this country, has effectively won, hasn't it? Here's the truth about most home security companies. They're like dealing with another bad cable company, like CNN. You spend hours waiting around for technicians, hours on the phone to get questions answered, and then when you're at your limit, you remember, I'm locked into a 3-year deal. Now, if you're looking to protect your